Hello, everybody. It is I, Malcolm Tent, from Danbury, Connecticut, bringing you this week's episode of Tent Talks Tunes. Right here in the moment, in the flesh, in the real, in the raw, live on Facebook. And if you're not watching this live on Facebook, then you're probably watching it archived on my Facebook page or watching it archived on my YouTube page. Either way is fine. As Fred Durst would say, it's all good. As long as you're watching, as long as I got someone to yap at for the next hour-ish. Welcome. Let's adjust the camera a little bit here. I'm actually a minute late today because the camera was having some hiccups and some issues. It didn't seem like it was going to work. But it is working. I had to throw it across the room a couple of times, bounce it off the wall, make it suffer a little bit, make it pay for its lack of obedience and its insubordination. But we got it to work. All is good, and I'm here. We're seeing people signing in. Hello, Derek the Bassman. Hello, Billy. Hello, James Pogo. Glad to see everybody signing in, dude. Yeah, you might have seen by the intro card, one might have thought that I was going to do a wrestling episode today. John knows I could talk about wrestling at length. I could do a lot of shows. A lot of show about wrestling. You know what I mean? Pear from Sweden? Yeah, you know what I mean. Excuse me. I am actually going to be doing a 1-hour interview with Phil Keller, former drummer of the almighty Anti-Scene, the band who I am currently the bass player for. Phil and I did a marathon 4-hour interview session for the Anti-Scene Facebook page and the Anti-Scene YouTube channel. And by the end of it, we started talking about wrestling, and we ended up just cutting the conversation right there and starting a brand new episode. And we talked about nothing but wrestling for an hour. And I'm talking about classic territory wrestling from the 70s, which is my point of view. And he was into classic, as much non-WWE, WWF, WW whatever wrestling from a few years later. So if y'all like wrestling, and if you recognized any of the faces that you saw on my cheap camera, you'll definitely want to stay tuned for the next Malcolm Tent Shoot interview where me and Phil Keller talk about wrestling. Oh, look at that. That should be on a blooper reel somewhere. Live action of my album cover prop falling off of the cheap backdrop. Filmed by a cheap camera for you, my priceless audience. So what do we get in the mail this week? We got some pretty cool stuff in the mail. Not a whole lot, but it's all about quality, not quantity. Got to tell you right now, it's my mailing address, Malcolm Tent, P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. It's kind of blurry, but I think you can see it. Got this really great postcard from my old friend Bob Eaton in Danbury. The Roxy, July 4th, 1976, the marquee with Flamin' Groovies and Ramones. Oh, what a night. I love getting postcards, and I'm always happy to send postcards back to people who send me postcards. Got another postcard from my main man Dylan Hauser, a.k.a. Hell Garbage, from Orlando, Florida. He has a very long-going series of postcard art, and this one talks about his new noise project, which is called Spiral Tanks. And he also sent me a cassette, which I just dropped on the floor. It's going to be one of these nights, I can tell. A cassette by his band Spiral Tanks. Look at that, a real, honest-to-God cassette with handwriting on it. How cool is that? I love this kind of stuff. Comes in a little Ziploc bag. I was so grateful to get this that I sent him a cassette in return. And I don't have a copy of it to show you, but I'm very, very excited about this project I've got going right now. When I was down in the Queen City, Charlotte, North Carolina, almost 2 weeks ago to do the most recent Anti-Scene live stream, the Halloween Quarantine, in which we set up an entire stage with lighting and sound and everything and gave you people a full-blown, full-on concert experience at top volume. when I was down there for that, Mad Brother Ward and I had some time one day when the band wasn't doing anything, and we decided to cut a noise session. It's an idea that's been in the back of our collective mind for quite a while. So he and I got our respective axes. I got my bass, he got his guitar. We got various effects pedals. I had like a pair of pliers and some metal tools, and he had some stuff like that. And we just made hardcore, hard pan stereo noise for a while. It was great. It was awesome. It was literally awesome, the sheer amount of sound we were getting. And I brought the recordings home, put them onto my computer, and started manipulating and editing and slicing and dicing, and came up with a release that's going to be on the TPOS label, my label, TPOS, called the Malcolm Tent Power Duo, featuring Mad Brother Ward. 60 minutes of hellacious and or heavenly soundscapes. It's not out yet, but I sent my main man Dylan an advance cassette of it in exchange for his Spiral Tanks tape. So thank you very much, Dylan, and thanks to everybody who sent me mail. Give you the address one more time: TPOS, P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. I love getting stuff in the mail, and I love sending stuff back. So yeah, everybody's in. Glad you guys are tuned in to hear me talk about eccentrics and weirdos. Present company included. Present company here, present company there. Freaks, weirdos, and eccentrics. My people. We are far more interesting than the normal people. We have a lot more to offer. Our culture is better, our music is better, our art is better. And what we do invariably gets co-opted by the mainstream and turned into pure fucking garbage. Shite, as they say in Holmfirth, England. Nothing but shite. So I'm glad to be here on this end of the supply chain, generating the awesome, bizarre, weird, left field stuff that mainstream culture gets everything from, because they don't have any ideas over there, man. They don't have ideas. Not an original thought in the lot of them, man. Fuck them. Let's talk about some of these weird-ass people. I'm going to go in alphabetical order. This guy right here, Copernicus. Here's an album called Victim of the Sky. Victim of the Sky by Copernicus. Whew. First heard of Copernicus when I was working at the great record store, Open Books and Records, in North Miami Beach, Florida. Well, that's it. This album cover does not want to stay put. You've seen this before. I'll show it to you again in a little while. We don't need it there. Heard of Copernicus working at Open Books and Records in July of 1985. My main man Brian Swirsky from New York City, he says, oh God, no. Copernicus. You people, if you're watching now, pay attention to the comments of Brian Swirsky, because he knows what he's talking about. Brian Swirsky is a well-learned man who's been around the block many times. So I'm going to talk about what I know about Copernicus, and hopefully, Brian, you will post a little bit about what you know about Copernicus, and we'll get the whole story. So I first heard of him working at Open Books and Records in the summer of '85. We got a promo album in the mail by Copernicus. And, you know, at the time I didn't quite appreciate it. It just sounded like a bunch of noodling and meandering with this total nut job ranting and raving on top of it. And didn't pay much attention to it. Go about a year forward, and I'm attending my very first show as a resident of the Northeast. I had moved from Florida to Connecticut, and soon thereafter went to a show at Irving Plaza in New York City. The show was Firehose and Sonic Youth. And, you know, Sonic Youth are on, I think it was the Evol tour at the time. And they're doing their thing and they're tearing it up. And in between songs, this dude on the floor of Irving Plaza, he starts forcing his way through the crowd, like yelling something about, "You don't have any ideas! Don't you have any ideas in ya? And I couldn't really understand everything, whatever he was saying, but it was about how Sonic Youth had no ideas. And he's like trying to bum rush the stage, and the place is packed. And he manages to get up about 3/4 of the way to the stage before he's just like, he can't go any further. But he's still yelling and raving. And Thurston Moore looks out and says, "It's Copernicus." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, it's the same guy." And then Thurston says, "He's going to shoot me." And nobody quite knew how to react to that, so nobody did. Copernicus eventually shut up and went away, and Sonic Youth carried on with their set. So I thought, all right, so that's what this Copernicus guy is all about. Although I will probably call him Copernicus forever. It took me a lot of effort, actually, when I held up this album, not to say Copernicus. So Thurston Moore, that's your fault. Copernicus. So I saw him, and it seems like Copernicus records for a long time were just kind of a part of the fabric of record store reality. Like, you really couldn't go anywhere without finding a Copernicus record in a box somewhere. It was like the way Jandeck records used to be. You could not get away from the damn things. There were millions of them. They were all over the place. Usually in the dollar box. Excuse me. Or if you saw one for full price, $6.98 or whatever, it had been sitting in the C section for years. Like, no one had ever bought the thing. It was all shop worn and raggedy and dog-eared because nobody would ever buy a Copernicus record. See, I just said it, Copernicus. So my curiosity is quite piqued by now, having seen the man in action. So the next time one of these records came through, I paid the $1 for it, cracked it open, gave it a listen, and yeah, it was a bunch of improvised noodling with some guy ranting and raving on top of it. It's just the way I remembered it. But now I had a slightly deeper appreciation for the aesthetic of this kind of thing. You know, my normal reaction when I was younger would have just been to laugh at it and dismiss it. But now I'm intrigued by this kind of stuff, and I really wonder what makes it tick, what drives this guy Copernicus, and who would back him up, and how do they come up with this stuff? Because behind every album, you know, there's a whole story. There's an entire process that goes into making an album. These things don't just disappear, just don't appear out of thin air. You got to record it. You know, unless it's all improv like this one is, I think you got to write it, cut demos, rehearse, edit the tape, make a master, you know, mix it, I mean, everything. Design the cover, send it off to get manufactured. There is a lot that goes into this record, which a lot of people, like myself, would just dismiss as a bunch of noodling with some crazy guy ranting and raving over it. You know, if nothing else, you got to give these people an A for effort for actually making it happen. It takes a lot of work and a lot of money to do it. So for that alone, you got to give these things at least a minute of your time. Just if nothing else, take a look at it and drop the needle in the groove for just a minute and give them at least that much consideration. So Copernicus, there it is again. He's put out at least 3 albums that I know of, and these are 2 of them. This is the first one. Came out in 1984, entitled "Nothing Exists." This one here from 1986, "Victim of the Sky." And I don't have the third one, so I don't know what it's called. But I do know that it's got this really expensive gold embossed cover. So once again, somebody went through a lot of trouble to make a really nice deluxe package for some music that's extremely outside. And a performer, that dude right there, I mean, look at that dude. You can tell that he only resides on this planet part-time, which is not necessarily a bad thing. This is merely an observation. You know, he's definitely coming from somewhere else. And New York City in the mid-'80s was a lot edgier than it is now, brothers and sisters, let me tell you. To be a guy like this in New York City in the mid-'80s was actually fairly typical, especially down on the Lower East Side. It was grunge before anybody even knew what the word grunge was. And so you've got this dude who, by all sounds and by all appearances, is just like a typical Lower East Side street crazy. Probably had some mental health issues. You know, just saying. And somehow was able to coalesce an entire body of players around him. Because if you look at the personnel on these 2 albums that came out 2 years apart, there's something like 15, 16 players, sometimes more, like between 15 and 20 players on each one of these records, and the personnel is just very consistent. You got Pierce Turner, Larry Kerwin, Thomas Hamlin, this guy or this gal, Fiona Gula, I don't know, Fiona Gula, whoever you are, Andy Leahy, Patty Higgins. It's like the number of players, Jimmy Zhivago, the number and the names from one album to the next are very consistent. So somebody actually, had enough belief and enough desire in this guy happening to make it happen. And there's some interesting stuff on here. It's like a lot of these albums, I'll say it again. It sounds like a bunch of improvised instrumental noodling with this guy ranting and raving on top of it. And to my ear and my mind, for the most part, it's not that interesting, but there are occasional nuggets that kind of bubble up to the surface, if I might use a mixed metaphor. Every now and again, something will just reach out and grab you. Like there's a song on this album here called From Bacteria, which is actually really cool. The lyrics are completely nuts, but the music hits a really nice groove. The Lament of Joe Apples. The title alone on that one is worth giving it a listen. I Know What I Think on the first album is pretty good. It's like so much of this music which is very challenging. You got to work a lot to find the gems, but when you find the gems, they really hit you pretty hard, and it's kind of cool. And Copernicus kind of has his mission statement on the back of this first album. No maze in my mind, because it sees what it sees. Signed, Copernicus. And I don't know if Copernicus still resides on this planet or if he's gone somewhere else, but that's a great epitaph. That's tombstone material. No maze in my mind, because it sees what it sees. Copernicus. I have no doubt in my mind you can still find Copernicus records out there fairly inexpensively. I've never paid more than $3 for one. And the next time I see that other album with the nice gold embossed lettering, I might pay $3 for it. Because there's probably about $3 worth of nuggets and gems on it. And it's worth swimming those murky waters to find the beauty of Copernicus. Salute to Copernicus. All right. That's one down. 3 to go, baby. Let's drink to the spirit of Copernicus. And see who else is tuned in live here on the dreaded Facebook. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, Dose. That was the opening band for Firehose and Sonic Youth. And Brian Swirsky was there and says that he was a maniac that night. Brian Swirsky, please don't leave us hanging. We want to hear some detailed Copernicus stories. I am hereby putting you on the spot to give us a paragraph, one paragraph about Copernicus. Okay? I know you can do it. I've known you for a long time, Brian Swirsky. I'm putting you on the spot. Please give us one paragraph about Copernicus. I'll be grateful, and all of our frantic fans and loyal listeners will also be grateful. Thank you, Brian Swirsky. All right, so Copernicus, if we're going logically, can only lead to one other artist. There's only one other artist in that section of the alphabet who could possibly follow Copernicus. And that's this dude right here. Troy CORY. Yeah, Troy CORY. Wow. I wish my camera was of higher resolution and you guys could really see this album cover. Troy CORY, Today's Puzzle, Volume 2. This is some bizarre shite, man. Most of Troy CORY's albums have a variant on this theme. Most of them have this exact same cover layout on the front and this cover layout on the back. Most of them are on the Cinema Prize label. Or is it Square Block? Or maybe it's Square Block Cinema Prize. Here, take a look at this if you guys can see it up close. My camera's god-awful for close-ups, but yeah, it's only getting worse. But that's the extremely blurry rendition of the Square Block Cinema Prize logo. He's got a bunch of these albums on this label. And Troy Corey, I cannot figure this guy out in the slightest bit. He does, on his albums, mostly standards. Like, like on this one he does Sugar to Tea, Fool Me Some More, Somewhere My Love, It's Impossible, Dream a Little Dream of Me. But then he throws in lots of like Beatles stuff. He does Imagine, Honey Pie, Something. What's on this one? Honey Pie again. All right. Different version too. Dream a Little Dream again. Wrap Your Troubles in Sugar to Tea again. And I'm pretty sure they're all different versions because this is on a completely different label. This is the Troy Corey Please album. Ah! And this is on the Hermit Asser label. What? Let's see if we can get a close-up of the label here. If you can read that, Hermit Asser. There it is, by Troy Corey. He also does this version of Light My Fire that you've got to hear it to believe it. Yeah, it's on this one too. That's weird, man. I never even noticed that these are virtually identical albums, except apparently completely different recordings. The mystery of Troy Corey just got deeper, kids. All of his covers, they have these weird-ass photo sessions of him and a bunch of models stiffly posed. I don't know who this kid is. It's not Troy Corey, but all these extremely stiffly posed, ultra-fashionable models, usually outdoors, as you can see, and in really bizarre situations. I don't know if you can see that, but, in addition to the usual extremely fashionably dressed models, one of them is completely nude, but is holding up a garbage can lid to hide her nakedness. And I can see from one album to the next, he uses the same modeling agency and several of the exact same models. Not the same models from one album to the next, but several of the same models from one album to the next. And if I recall correctly, the majority of the Troy Corey albums, which look like this, and they're on the Square Block Cinema Prize label, were sold by mail order. They were direct mail order sales. I never in my life ever saw one of these in a record store, ever, unless it had been traded in as a used copy or something like that. So I seem to recall that they were mail order only. And he had some kind of an angle with, I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was, but there was something attached to this mail order album business. And if anybody can find out what it is, I would love to see the comments, because I'm dying to know. And his stuff is weird. His songs, when he sings them, are like beyond laid back. They're more like laid out. It sounds like he's like literally laying down on the floor, half passed out, sort of crooning out these tunes. And the thing is, he can sing. He definitely knows how to sing. But the way he sings everything is so stylized and so arranged that it sounds like a total put-on. But I don't think it is. I don't think this guy is trying to put anybody on. I think he's legit, which is why I like it so much. I don't think there's any joke here at all. Why are these women on the back of his album cover? And why are they posed like that? Like, seriously, what does this mean? What's he trying to get across? If it's a big seduction scene that he's trying to make a soundtrack to, I don't think it works. Because you just end up falling asleep after a few songs, unless you're, like, really listening carefully. And then if you're listening to the music, it ain't going to be a seduction scene. I don't know. Troy Corey is a weird dude with an extremely unique and eccentric artistic vision. And he's probably got 14 or 15 albums out. I used to have them all. I'm not going to go into the circumstances as to why I don't have them all, to protect the guilty. But I'm building up my Troy Corey collection. I got 2 now. 2. Still working on it. And I know the next time I actually paid, if you can see that, I paid $2 for this one. I will continue to pay $2 each for these very weird Troy CORY records. Well worth it. Well worth it. Man, talking about Troy CORY, I got to drink some more of this good Danbury tap water. Ah, so delicious, so refreshing. So pure, so energizing. Hope you guys are staying hydrated while I do this. Let's see who else is tuned in live and who's going to get to look at this later on the YouTube channel. Brian Swirsky, yes, I'm serious, Brian. I really want to have a paragraph about Copernicus. I see my main man, Stephen Friedland, is tuned in. He's also known as Brute Force. If you guys saw the episode we did with Brute Force earlier, pay attention to Brute Force. He's got something good coming up. We love Brute Force. And if you didn't see the Brute Force episode of Tent Talks Tunes, then by all means, go look it up. Either here on my Facebook page or on my YouTube channel. He gave us the world debut of a brand new composition. Played a couple songs in situ. And we had a great conversation. So, cheers to Brute Force, aka Stephen Friedland, and Mazel Tov to you. Good stuff. Alright, speaking of eccentrics and weirdos, I might as well talk about the best one I know of. The one I'm the most familiar with. See, no crashing backdrop is going to prevent me from marketing my own album. Alright? The Multiple Moods of Malcolm X. I haven't talked about this one in weeks. Figured I'd give you guys a little bit of a break. But the breaks are over. It's time to talk about this record. It's my career-spanning retrospective album. Features 14, count them, 14, or if you prefer, 14 of the bands I've been in since 1983. And one day I'm going to do an episode of Tent Talks Tunes devoted exclusively to these bands. Broken Talent, the King Hatreds, the Bunny Brains, Bobby, the Malcolm Tent Power Duo, as represented by this piece of backdrop right here. They Hate Us. Here they are. BB Gun, The Residents, quote unquote. Long explanation. Fried Man, Ultra Bunny, Number Station, The Cone Toes, The Almighty Anti-Scene, and of course me, the solo artist Malcolm Tent. 14 original artists, 14 original hits, 15 original bucks post-paid. Look it up on Discogs and eBay. I have plenty of people watching right now who will testify as to the sheer quality and awesomeness of this record. Believe me, you can take their word for it because they know what they're talking about. You don't have to trust me. Just listen to the voice of the people when they tell you that the Multiple Moods of Malcolm Tent is a damn good album. It's true. All right, we survived the seas. We survived the infomercial. Now it's time to get to D. That's D for dog. Swamp Dogg. Look at that. The original DOGG. Swamp Dogg. Before we talk about Swamp Dogg, let's see who's people. Oh wow! According to Billy Veazey, hope I said that right. There's a bunch of Copernicus videos on YouTube. I know what I'll be looking at later tonight. And what Derek Giles says, this is a direct quote. He says regarding this album, "Buy that fucking album. I did, and I spin it a lot." If it's good enough for Derek Giles, it's good enough for you. Brute Force, if you're watching right now, please stay tuned. I'm not going to be a spoiler, but you just stay tuned, all right? Along with everybody else. Swamp Dogg, a guy named Jerry Williams. And I first heard of Swamp Dogg when I was digging through the $1 cassettes at this really great record store we used to have in North Miami Beach called Vibrations Records. Vibrations was a very small chain in South Florida. And I think they might have only had 2 stores, maybe 3. And they had all kinds of great stuff. For a chain store, they really brought in some excellent cutting-edge outside stuff. And after a few years of going there, I noticed that they had this habit of taking, especially with cassettes, unsold cassettes, they'd mark them down to $1 and throw them in this great big bin. And it didn't matter what it was. If the cassette had been sitting there for too long, they just make it $1 and you could have at it. God damn, I found some amazing, amazing cassettes in that bin for $1. I'm going to guess the cassettes were non-returnable. God, Cabaret Voltaire live at the YMCA. Dead Kennedys live in Berlin bootleg cassette. Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band, Dock at the Radar Station. God, so many others, all for $1 each. And one of them was by this guy, Swamp Dogg. It was called I'm Not Selling Out, I'm Buying In. And it had a picture of old Swamp Dogg himself in a gleaming white tuxedo and a cane and a top hat strutting down a table while a bunch of really uptight Caucasian businessmen look on. And I thought, for $1, I'll try it out. A guy named Swamp Dogg, and he looks like that? Yeah, it's worth $1. Took it home, gave it a listen, didn't like it. Didn't really like it that much. It was one of those deals where the concept, I thought, kind of outstripped the music. I loved his song titles. He had one called Our Love Ain't Worth 2 Dead Flies. I mean, God, is that not the best song title you ever heard? And then, of course, the album cover and the name Swamp Dogg. But for some reason, the music didn't really grab me. It was very slick. It was very 80s and very slick and very produced. So I kind of sort of shuffled that one away. But I always remembered Swamp Dogg. And over the years, I would see an occasional Swamp Dogg record here and there. One was called Rat On. Had this awesome album cover. Same deal. Swamp Dogg with a picture of Swamp Dogg riding a giant white rat. Called Rat On. Love it. Paid the $1 for it. Took it home. It was kind of the same deal, you know, like the song titles were great, the lyrics were really cool, but musically it didn't quite hit the mark. There's another album by him called Total Destruction to Your Mind. Once again, it's like the curse of Swamp Dogg. His ideas and his concepts are so great, and you'd think I would fall in love with them immediately, but they just musically always seem to kind of veer off. They never really quite hit the sweet spot. But I never gave up on Swamp Dogg. I could tell that Swamp Dogg had something I needed. I just hadn't been able to find it yet. Sure enough, patience and persistence pay off. That's patience and persistence pay off, baby. Because I found this Swamp Dogg record called Have You Heard This Story? This is the Swamp Dogg record I had been waiting for. Because not only does it have great song titles, such as My Mind Does the Dancing While the Body Pulls the Strings, one called My Hang-Ups Ain't Hung Up No More, another one called God Ain't Blessing America, woo. Another one called Chewed Up Grass, you know, just really, really evocative, weird song titles. Did I come back too soon or stay away too long? Good stuff. So I brought it home, put it on, bingo. For the first time, to my ear, the Swamp Dogg music was as good as the lyrics and the concept and the cover and the song titles. This record just hits the mark everywhere. Great players, really great players on this one. And awesome lyrics and you know, really great song titles and liner notes in which he thanks everybody from the lawyer who gets him out of the lousy contracts he signed, to his teenage daughters who are going through their difficult years, to, you know, the guy who runs and gets him things in the studio. He talks about how his first 5 albums are completely unavailable and you can't find them anywhere and they lost money and the labels wouldn't release them. I mean, it's hilarious. It is hilarious how he writes and what he writes about and how completely honest and no BS it is. And his lyrics are all about how he's got indigestion and heartburn and heart palpitations and hyperventilation and his back hurts, and it's great. It's just really, really great. And the music kicks butt. Turns out the Swamp Dogg is, in a way, like my main man, Brute Force. Because Brute Force had a very similar career trajectory as Swamp Dogg. Swamp Dogg started out as a guy named Jerry Williams, who did lots of writing, lots of production, lots of A&R work. He has writing credits on probably 50 different songs. He's had chart hits with artists all across the universe in all kinds of genres through many different decades. And at some point, he just decided he wanted to have a voice of his own. He didn't want to write stuff for other people anymore. He wanted to write stuff for his own very unique, highly idiosyncratic voice. And the character he created, Swamp Dogg. Very much like how Stephen Friedland went from being a songwriter with songs placed everywhere and chart singles and became Brute Force and started writing for this very idiosyncratic character named Brute Force. And another one, I'm sure you guys all know very well, how this dude Clarence Reed started out doing the same thing, just writing hits and having singles and records of his own, but at some point decided to reinvent himself as Blowfly. Yes, indeed. So you've got these real left-of-center eccentric artists like Swamp Dogg and Brute Force and Blowfly who have deep, deep, rich histories in the music business. And that's what makes stuff like Swamp Dogg that much more fascinating to me, because it's like, these guys aren't crazy. They know exactly what they're doing. You know, they've got the mileage under their tires. They've got the pounds under their belts. They can write, they can produce, they can have hits if they want, but instead they decide to go off and be these guys and do this and pursue their vision, quite often at great cost, but they never give up. They never stop. So I really salute these dudes. This is really, really cool. Swamp Dogg is still at it to this day. He released an album earlier this year. Haven't heard it yet. I'm curious to check it out, you know, because once I heard how good this record was, now I want to go back to those other albums that I didn't quite get the first time, like Rat On and Total Destruction to Your Mind, and I'm Not Selling Out, I'm Buying In. I want to revisit them and see what it was I was missing the first time. I have a feeling it's probably some good stuff. So Swamp Dogg, yes! And big shout-outs again to Brute Force, Blowfly, Stephen Friedland, Clarence Reed. I love you guys all. Y'all rule! Drinks! Prost! To the Eccentrics. Let's see how the internet feed is doing. Derek says he remembers the dollar tape bin. Derek, are you from North Miami Beach, Florida, originally? Tell me something. I gotta know. Howie McNutt. How you doing, Howie? Hope that life off the road is treating you well. Let's see. And here's a quote from Derek Giles. Go get a haircut so you can tell the barber you're tired of looking like an asshole. I hope that is a lyric from a Swamp Dogg song. Interesting. All right, gang. Got one more for you. One more of my favorite eccentric artists. And it's kind of the same deal, the same scenario that I've been talking about for the last 39 minutes and 20 seconds. If you're like I am, and you're constantly trawling the record stores, and if you're like I am and you're fascinated by the contents of the dollar bin, you have no doubt it is inevitable that you have seen not one, not two, not three, probably a dozen or more different albums by the one, the only, the inimitable ZOOGZ RIFT. Yes, ZOOGZ RIFT. How many records have you people seen out there by ZOOGZ RIFT? And how many of them have you seen in the dollar bin? Probably quite a few. That kind of begs the next question. How many of you have actually listened to a ZOOGZ RIFT record? Just curious. Just curious. My fascination and love for ZOOGZ RIFT once again goes back to Open Books and Records in North Miami Beach, Florida. Once again, the year 1985-ish. I was at the counter, working one day, went out to get the mail, and there was one of those things that we used to get almost on a daily basis. A box of promo records from SST. Let's see if we can get a fix on the exact year. Okay, 86 is when this happened. 86. So it's early 86. Early to mid 86 when this happened. Go out to the mailbox. Oh boy, another promo pack from SST. This was in the either extremely late period of or immediate aftermath of Black Flag. When SST was just cranking out albums. This is when SST became Greg Ginn's boutique label. The basic criterion to be on SST was, does Greg Ginn like it? Okay, he'll release it. No questions asked. And, my God, this is SST number what? What number SST is this? This is SST number, it's only number 77. Wow, so they were only just beginning to get into the sheer deluge of releases. But even so, you figure it's 1986, and they'd only been a real active label since 1984, after all the lawsuits and everything, and they're up to 77 already. And a lot of them were albums by ZOOGZ RIFT. The Island of Living Puke. Opened it up. So the first thing I saw was this awesome lyric sheet with drawings by John Truby. John Truby from the Ugly Janitors of America did these great cartoons. Oh, man. Here you go. Here's a typical John Truby cartoon. If you can't read the caption, I'll show you the art. Okay, you can see that rather unpleasant character. And what is he saying? He's saying, why waste time on music when you can have an exciting career as a computer programmer? Ha 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 ha. Yeah. Okay, so right away I'm kind of hooked. The lyric sheet alone promises good stuff. And then we got the typical SST press kit with all the press clippings and descriptions and a timeline, a very funny timeline about the life of ZOOGZ RIFT, and some pretty cool artwork. SST, man, they must have had an awful lot of money because all their promo albums were just stuffed with these things. No 8x10, but they quite often came with 8x10s. And of course the album and the ubiquitous SST catalog. Yeah, by now they had the second Gone album, they had Painted Willie, Angst, Tom Tricoli's Dog, for God's sake. Yeah, this is the territory that SST was in at this point. Man, they must have sold a lot of Black Flag records, because they sure as hell put out a lot of ZOOGZ RIFT records, and a lot of Angst records, and a lot of Leaving Trains records. And to this day, SST owes me $250-something because of that. But that's a different story for a different day. Talking about ZOOGZ RIFT. I put on this record, and the first song on it, which is called Rediscover Downtown Patterson, was just the funniest thing I think I've ever heard. What an immortal tagline. It's the Island of Living Puke, you asshole! And it's all songs about how you might have won $1 million and what the great, the great civic doings of Patterson, New Jersey, and, mowing the lawn and just like all the agonizing, horrible things that just torture a creative person when they have to live in the so-called real world. It was funny. It was angry. It was angsty. It was smart. Awesome introduction to ZOOGZ RIFT, the Island of Living Puke. But there was also kind of a problem with ZOOGZ RIFT. And I noticed it getting about midway through side 1. I mean, okay, yeah, it's really smart. It's really funny. It's really clever. It's very angry. It's very cutting edge. But it also sounds a lot like Frank Zappa. And as you get into it more, it sounds a lot like Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart and Frank Zappa. And I think that's one reason why ZOOGZ RIFT never really took off, because his stuff sounds a lot like Zappa. And, you can't blame the dude for writing in the style that he writes. I know, I'll say that from personal experience. I don't know how many gigs I've played with my solo guitar all across the US of A, in Mexico, England, France, Belgium, Wales. I've been all over the place. In Europe, I'll play a set and they'll come up to me afterwards, the audience will say, wow, that was really great. I really like that. You sound an awful lot like Loudon Wainwright III. I'm like, I do? I don't think I've ever heard Loudon Wainwright III. He should probably be in this episode of Tent Talks Tunes. Never even heard of the guy. But apparently I sound a lot like Loudon Wainwright III. In the U.S., and Mexico for that matter, whenever I play a show, and if someone comes up to me and talks, invariably it's like, wow, man, you sound a lot like Jello Biafra. And I never ever saw that. I never heard that until fairly recently. I was playing some stuff I had recorded, mixing a tape, and I heard myself singing, and I was like, I do sound a lot like Jello Biafra. I really do. I can't help it. That's the voice I got. That's the way I sing. That's why I ended up making this sticker many years ago. Malcolm Tent. Prettier than Jello Biafra. Smarter than the Nuge. Because they also say I look like Ted Nugent. I don't look like Ted Nugent. Or do I? Let's have an honest-to-God opinion poll here. I want everybody to weigh in right now. We already know, all right, I sound like Jello Biafra. I'm sorry that my nasal cavity is shaped the way it is, and it makes me sound like Jello Biafra when I sing a certain high note. But do I really look like Ted Nugent? Tell me, people. Do I look like Ted Nugent? I want to know. Larry Mann says not until today. All right, so I've poisoned all your minds. I'm sorry. I want to see a couple of more people to chime in. And if people are watching this on my YouTube channel sometime in the future, leave a comment. Do I look like Ted Nugent? I need to know. Scott Monroe, who has known me for decades, says, I do not look like the Nuge. Thank you. Billy says, kinda. All right, so we've got a yes, we've got a no, and we've got a kinda. I need one tiebreaker. One tiebreaker. Stephen Costello says, F the Nuge. Don't know if I'd go that far. I mean, I'm certainly a better musician than he is, and I'm certainly funnier than he is, and as my sticker says, I'm smarter than he is. I'm a better guitar player than he is. I'm more obnoxious than he is, but I wouldn't say F him. Just saying. Gordon Thompson doesn't know who Ted Nugent is. Hey, that's a cultural divide for you. Pear from Sweden says no. Derek from Georgia says yes. And Andy Miller says yeah, a little, but I'm too bony. And Ted and his wife wished Andy Miller a happy birthday. Well, you know what? If the Nuge can do it, I can do it too. Happy birthday, Andy Miller. Woo! A fine musician, a good man, and one of the very, very few people who have ever seen blow fire live on stage. That is not lightweight shit, kids. Ain't nothing lightweight about that at all. Woo! So thank you, Andy. The only thing I'm going to say finally about the Nuge, his biggest crime in my book, He's not Mark Farner. You got Mark Farner, and you got the Nooge. Mark Farner, kids. That's where the action is. All right, so I'm glad we finally settled that issue. Oh, and I didn't even mention Andy Miller's band, Knowledge is for Fools. Great name, great band. Look them up. They get the Malcolm Tent recommendation. KIFF, Knowledge is for Fools. Woo! So it's not ZOOGZ RIFT's fault necessarily that he writes like Frank Zappa. In fact, there's a song on one of his albums where he does the musical equivalent of My Sticker. You know, he says, people say I write like Frank Zappa. And then it's like one bar of perfect Frank Zappa music. People say I sound like Captain Beefheart. And that's another one bar of perfect Beefheart music. So he was aware. He knew. You know, but he's like Sammy Davis Jr. He's got to be him. And somehow Greg Ginn discovered him and just started cranking out albums by ZOOGZ RIFT. I used to have like 9 or 10 ZOOGZ RIFT albums in my collection. And I finally started listening to them critically. And I whittled it down to, so far, 3 that I really need. Island of Living Puke, Shithead, and of course this one, Idiots on the Miniature Golf Course. And his publishing company is called Miss Ann Thorpe Music. Smart man. Smart man. You know, for the average Joe and Josephine listener out there, too much similarity to Frank Zappa. To the best of my knowledge, he never toured. I know he did play live shows, because there's an awesome song on here called, where is it? Is it the torture sequence? No. The nightclub sequence, which is great. It's the sound of ZOOGZ RIFT's band playing in the background somewhere, with a bunch of chattering morons in the front right next to the tape recorder yakking about picking up chicks or something like that. ZOOGZ RIFT knew what the score was. But I don't think he toured. This is the kind of thing that you probably had to see live to really get it, because the level of musicianship is just stratospheric. Like, these guys could play. ZOOGZ RIFT, he could write. And ZOOGZ RIFT is kind of like Copernicus and, pardon me while I get distracted here for a second. Other guys like Root Boy Slim. He had a regular cast of musicians that he could draw on. Guys like Richie Haas and here's a couple others. Don't know all the names, but Richie Haas for sure. And John Truby was in and out of ZOOGZ RIFT's orbit for a long time. So he had a pretty regular crew that he could rely on, who knew how to play his stuff and could interpret it right and do it justice. So whether you like the writing style or not, it's always good. It's always high caliber. And I don't know how much money SST lost on ZOOGZ RIFT records, but apparently nobody cares, because Greg Ginn can still sell Black Flag records, and he can jack the wholesale price a few bucks every couple of months, and people will still buy them. And he can release Black Flag CDs or whatever on SST and kind of do the same thing. Just keep on jacking the wholesale price every couple of months with no change in packaging, no remastering, no improvement of quality, and just people keep buying them for more and more money from one day to the next almost. It's a great racket. I wish I were as smart as Greg Ginn, because that's a hell of a racket he's got. But I won't drink to him. He owes me 250 bucks. As I said before, that's another story for another day. So if anybody wants to hear that story, let me know. If I do an episode on sick, twisted, blood pressure rising tales of the music industry, that will be one of the stories. Luckily, I don't have too many of those. I'd say the vast majority of my tales in the music business so far, knock on metal, or wood. So far, so good. It's been a pretty good ride so far, and most of the horrible nonsense I've heard has been second or third hand, so fingers crossed. My, my, my. Well, you know, kids, 55 minutes and 8 seconds really does fly by very quickly. I had a great time talking about Copernicus, Troy CORY, Swamp Dog, ZOOGZ RIFT, and also by extension, Brute Force and Blowfly. As always, I thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I love it. I love seeing everybody commenting and getting some discussions going on, and my regulars and people who are just ducked in for the first time now, thank you. You give a tired old man something to do on a Wednesday night. So don't forget, look up my label, TPOS, which oddly enough just happens to be well represented on Discogs and eBay. My various bands, They Hate Us, The Almighty Anti-Scene, my all-improv noise rock combo, Ultra Bunny, and of course me, Malcolm Tent Solo. Because if you do that, I get to continue feeding my face and feeding the cat, who's asleep on the couch over there, without having to punch a clock. And I'm grateful for that until the day is done. So, I do hope to be back in about 167 hours with another episode of Tent Talks Tunes. So till we meet again, this is Malcolm Tent saying so long from the Nutmeg State.